On the morning of September 12, 1968, inside the Sinfin engine test facility in Derby, England, a man named Adrian Lombard stands in front of the most expensive piece of machinery his company has ever attempted to build. He does not smile. He has not smiled in weeks. Lombard is the director of engineering at Rolls-Royce Limited, the man responsible for turning the promise of the RB211 turbofan engine into a physical, working, certifiable product. He is 53 years old. He has spent 30 of those years inside this company. He has overseen engines that powered military jets, commercial liners, and the aircraft that carried Britain's post-war identity across the sky. He knows what a working engine sounds like. What he is hearing right now is not it. Chapter 1. The engine that would not stop breaking inside the test chamber. The RB211's carbon fiber fan blades are screaming under load. Then one of them cracks. Not bends, not deforms. Cracks. Clean and catastrophic, the way glass cracks when it meets concrete. The test is halted. The engineers go in. They look at each other in the kind of silence that carries more information than any report. This is the third time this month. Lombard walks to the window. Outside, the Derby skyline sits gray and flat under an autumn sky. 30,000 workers are clocked in across Rolls-Royce sites today, 80,000 across the full company. Men who have mortgages because of this company. Men whose fathers worked here. Men whose sons are already apprenticed. The city of Derby does not exist separately from Rolls-Royce. It exists because of it, and in this room, on this morning, Lombard is holding a number in his head that he cannot say out loud yet. The number is this: if carbon fiber cannot work, they switch to titanium. Titanium adds weight. Weight changes performance targets. Performance changes the contract specifications. And the contract, the fixed price, penalty-heavy, multi-million-pound agreement with Lockheed Aircraft Corporation signed just months ago, does not move. The world already knows Rolls-Royce will deliver the RB211. The press said so, the government said so. The chairman, Sir Denning Pearson, stood in front of cameras and spoke about the future of British aviation with the quiet confidence of a man who has never been wrong in public. Hi viewers, have you ever worked somewhere, or known someone who worked somewhere, that felt completely untouchable, until it wasn't? Drop your answer in the comments, and if this story is already gripping you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now here is the part the cameras didn't show. Lombard sets the test report down on the desk. He circles the blade failure count. 3 in 30 days. He draws a line from that number to the delivery timeline. Then he stares at the gap between them, the gap between what the engine can do right now and what the contract demands it do on the date already inked. Nobody has told Lockheed. Nobody has told Sir Denning Pearson publicly, not in the terms that would trigger alarm. Nobody, in September of 1968, inside the most respected engineering company in the world, is willing to stand up and say the sentence that this room is screaming, the RB211 is not ready, and the world thinks it already is. Lombard turns off the test chamber light. He picks up his report. He walks down the corridor past the framed photographs of every great Rolls-Royce engine that came before. The Eagle, the Merlin, the Avon, the Conway. Each one a triumph. Each one delivered. Each one proof that this company bends reality to its will. He passes the last photograph. He does not look at it. Because for the first time in his career, Adrian Lombard is not sure they can do it again. And what he does next, what he chooses to say, and to whom, and when, will determine whether 80,000 jobs survive the decade. Chapter 2. A city built on one company's name. On a freezing Tuesday morning in January 1965, a man named Arthur Wilkins ties his bootlaces in the front room of his terraced house on Nightingale Road in Derby. He does this the same way his father did, and his father's father before that. Slow, precise, like it matters. It does matter. Because where Arthur is going, precision is the only language they speak. He pulls on his coat, steps out into the cold, and joins the stream of men already moving down the street toward the Rolls-Royce Aero engine facility. Some nod at him, A few call out by name. Nobody rushes. You don't rush to something you know will still be there when you arrive. Arthur is 41 years old. His grandfather riveted airframes in this building during the First World War. His father worked the Merlin engine line in the Second, the same Merlin that powered the Spitfire and the Hurricane, the same engine the RAF flew straight into the Luftwaffe over the English Channel in the summer of 1940. Arthur is old enough to remember his father coming home from those shifts and saying almost nothing about the work, just washing his hands carefully and sitting down to eat with the quiet expression of a man who knows what he is building and why it matters. Arthur carries that same expression to work every single morning. His son Michael is 17. He is already asking questions about apprenticeships. This is not unusual. In Derby, in 1965, it is simply the shape of life. By this year, Rolls-Royce employs more than 83,000 workers across its British sites. The Aero Engine division alone accounts for a meaningful share of the country's total aerospace export earnings. Airlines from Europe, Asia, and North America buy their engines here. The Royal Air Force trusts its fleet to these workshops. The British government points to this factory as evidence, quiet, mechanical, undeniable evidence, that Britain still leads. The order books are full. The workforce has expanded 4 times over since the end of the war. New buildings have gone up around the original red brick core of the Derby plant. The canteen serves 2,000 men at lunch. The company football team plays in a league where half the opposing players' fathers also work here. The grammar school careers officer on Leopold Street tells his best students to consider Rolls-Royce not as a job, but as a path. Something you give your working life to, and in return it gives structure to everything else. On Nightingale Road alone, 11 men work at the Rolls-Royce plant. 11 households where the mortgage is steady, the groceries are regular, and the future, the actual, physical, touchable future, looks solid. Inside the factory, Arthur runs a section of the final assembly line for the Spey turbofan engine. He has done this for 16 years. He knows the tolerances of every component that passes through his hands. He knows the sound of a shaft correctly balanced versus one that will cause problems at altitude. He runs his team with the same quiet authority his father used, the same economy of language, the same refusal to accept anything that does not meet the spec. When a new engineer, fresh from university, asks Arthur how he knows when something is wrong before the instruments confirm it, Arthur looks at the engine for a long moment before answering. "You just know," he says, "same way you know when someone in your house is sick before they say anything." That is the culture of Rolls-Royce in 1965. Knowledge held in the hands. Trust built in layers over decades. Reputation not as a marketing phrase, but as a physical fact. The company does not advertise precision. It produces it. And in the commercial aviation market of the mid-1960s, that reputation has real, hard, contractual weight. Airlines that specify Rolls-Royce engines do so because the alternative, an engine failure at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic, is not a business problem. It is a catastrophe. Rolls-Royce engines do not cause catastrophes. That is not a boast. That is a track record. But the aviation market is changing fast, and change is expensive. The jet age is not slowing down. It is accelerating. Boeing is designing the 747. Lockheed is planning the L-1011. McDonnell Douglas is building the DC-10. These are not upgraded versions of existing aircraft. These are wide-body jets. Massive, high-capacity machines designed to carry 300 passengers across oceans on a single tank of fuel. They need engines powerful enough to lift them, efficient enough to make the economics work, and quiet enough to satisfy the new noise regulations being discussed in the United States. Rolls-Royce's American competitors, Pratt & Whitney and General Electric, are already developing engines for this market. They are well-funded, well-staffed, and operating on their home turf, selling to American manufacturers in a country where congressional contracts and government support make the financial terrain far more forgiving. Rolls-Royce is watching this from Derby, and what Sir Denning Pearson, the company's chairman, understands clearly, correctly. And with the logic of a man who has spent his entire career in industrial strategy, is that if Rolls-Royce does not win a wide-body engine contract in the next few years, the commercial aero engine market will consolidate around American suppliers. Britain will still make fine engines for the RAF. But the commercial future, the growth market, the next 30 years of aviation, that will belong to Pratt & Whitney. That cannot happen. It is not just a business decision, it is a statement about what Britain is. So when Lockheed begins accepting bids for the engine that will power its new L1011 TriStar, Pearson does not approach the opportunity cautiously. He approaches it the way Rolls-Royce has always approached every challenge that mattered, with total commitment. And that is precisely where the first crack forms, so thin and quiet that no one in January of 1965 could see it. The very confidence that built this company, the absolute certainty that they could deliver anything they committed to, is about to be tested against an engine that has never been built before, using materials that have never been proven in flight, on a contract that leaves no room for the unexpected. Arthur Wilkins ties his bootlaces. He walks to work. He does not know any of this yet, but the decision that will end his career is already being made. Chapter 3. The contract signed before the proof existed. In the spring of 1966, Sir Denning Pearson sits across a conference table from a team of Lockheed engineers in Burbank, California, and makes a decision that will end his company. He does not know it yet. Neither does anyone else in the room. Pearson is 61. He is not an emotional man. He is an engineer by training and a strategist by habit, a combination that produces a particular kind of intelligence, the kind that is excellent at solving problems with known variables and genuinely dangerous when the variables are unknown. His career at Rolls-Royce stretches back to the war years. He has watched the company survive rationing, post-war contraction, the transition from propeller to jet, and every competitive pressure the American aerospace industry has thrown at them. He has always found a way through. That record of success is the second character in this room, invisible but present, sitting at the table right alongside him. The Lockheed proposal is this: they need an engine for the L1011 TriStar widebody. It must produce approximately 42,000 pounds of thrust. It must be quieter than existing engines to comply with American airport noise restrictions. It must be fuel efficient enough to justify the economics of the aircraft. And it must be ready for delivery in time to meet Lockheed's own production schedule, a schedule that leaves the engine supplier approximately 4 years to design, develop, test, certify, and begin serial production. 4 years. For an engine that does not yet exist. Pearson's team presents the RB211. The concept is 3 years old at this point. A revolutionary 3-shaft turbofan design that, on paper, does everything Lockheed needs and more. The 3-shaft architecture gives it performance advantages over the 2-shaft designs Pratt & Whitney and General Electric are developing. The RB211, if it works as the engineering models predict, will be genuinely superior, not marginally, substantially. There is one feature at the center of the design that makes everything else possible: carbon fiber composite fan blades. In 1966, carbon fiber is the most exciting engineering material on the planet. Stronger than steel at a fraction of the weight, it promises to reshape aerospace, automotive, and a dozen other industries. The Rolls-Royce materials team, led by researchers who have been experimenting with the compound since the early 1960s, believes they can produce fan blades from carbon fiber composites that will be lighter than titanium, stronger under normal operating conditions, and manufacturable at the volumes the contract requires. Believes. Pearson knows this. What he also knows is this: no one in the world has successfully used carbon fiber fan blades in a certified commercial jet engine. Not Pratt & Whitney, not General Electric, not any European manufacturer. It has not been done because the certification process requires the blades to survive bird strike tests, simulated impacts from birds ingested into the engine at high speed, and composite materials behave very differently from metals under sudden violent impact. The testing is ongoing. The results are promising. They are not conclusive. Pearson signs the contract in March of 1968. The terms are fixed price, £135 million for the full development and initial production program. Penalties for late delivery are written in. Rolls-Royce will supply all RB211 engines for the TriStar. Lockheed has already signed its own deal with Eastern Airlines, TWA, and Air Holdings of London for 144 aircraft. The airline orders are contingent on the aircraft. The aircraft is contingent on the engine. The engine is contingent on carbon fiber fan blades that have not yet passed a bird strike test. The logic Pearson uses to justify the risk is not irrational. It is worth understanding clearly because it is the logic every ambitious organization uses before it falls. First, Rolls-Royce needs this contract. Losing to Pratt & Whitney means ceding the wide-body market to an American supplier with American government backing. That outcome, commercially and symbolically, is unacceptable. Second, the RB211 design is genuinely innovative. The performance data supports the projections. The engineering team believes in it. These are not salesmen saying what clients want to hear. These are engineers who understand thermodynamics and materials science. And they are confident. Third, Rolls-Royce has delivered every engine it has ever committed to. Everyone. The Merlin, the Derwent, the Avon, the Conway, the Spey. Every contract met. Why would this one be different? This is the most dangerous thought in the room, and no one says it out loud, because it is so deeply assumed that it requires no words. Sir Denning Pearson shakes hands with Lockheed's representatives. The deal is announced publicly. In Britain, the headlines are celebratory. In Derby, the news reaches the factory floor by mid-afternoon. Men slap each other on the back. Overtime is mentioned. The future feels secured. At his desk in the Derby facility, Adrian Lombard reads the contract terms a second time, then a third time. He circles the fixed price clause. He circles the delivery date. He draws a line between them and writes one number next to it. The number of successful bird strike tests the carbon fiber blades have passed so far. 0. He closes the folder. He puts it in his drawer. He goes back to work. The machine is already running. And no one in this company, not Pearson, not Lombard, not the 80,000 workers counting on the contract, knows yet that it is already pointed at a wall. Chapter 4. Champagne in London, Cracks in the Dark. On the 29th of March, 1968, the front page of the Times carries a photograph of Sir Denning Pearson shaking hands with a Lockheed executive at the Savoy Hotel in London. The headline reads, Rolls-Royce secures landmark aviation contract. The subheading calls it a triumph for British engineering. In Derby, the factory canteen posts the clipping on the notice board. Men eat their lunches and read it and feel the quiet satisfaction of having their professional world confirmed by a newspaper that has never once walked their assembly floor. The champagne in London is real. The celebration is real. The contract, £135 million, the largest commercial aero engine deal in British history, is real. Rolls-Royce shares rise on the London Stock Exchange. Analysts write optimistic summaries. One investment note, circulated in city offices that spring, describes the RB211 contract as a generational lock on the European wide-body engine market. The author has never seen the interior of a test bay. Meanwhile, in the Sinfin test facility 3 miles from Derby city centre, a team of engineers is doing something that does not make the newspapers. They are removing a carbon fiber fan blade from the RB211 test engine with a pair of gloved hands, turning it slowly under the fluorescent light, and looking at a fracture line that runs from the base to the tip. It is the second blade failure in 6 weeks. The test, called a bird ingestion simulation, fires a 4-pound bird carcass into the rotating engine at the speed of takeoff. In a certified commercial engine, the blades must absorb this impact without catastrophic failure. Titanium blades flex, they deform, they survive. Carbon fiber blades, the team is learning, do not absorb impact the same way. Under the sudden violent force of a bird strike, the composite structure does not bend, it shatters. This is not a minor problem. It is a fundamental materials problem. The engineer who writes the first formal test failure report in April of 1968 is a man named Stanley Hooker, one of the most respected aero engine designers in Britain, brought back to Rolls-Royce from Bristol, Italy specifically to help manage the RB211 program. Hooker is 70 years old, and he has seen enough engines to know what a certifiable problem looks like versus what a temporary setback looks like. In his report, he is careful with the language. He describes the blade failures as requiring further investigation and notes that the testing program will need to be extended. The language is precise and measured. It does not, in April of 1968, ring the alarm bells that the actual physical evidence warrants. There is a reason for this, inside Rolls-Royce. As inside most institutions with long, perfect track records, the culture has an immune response to bad news. Not a dishonest one. Nobody is lying. Nobody is deliberately hiding data. The immune response is subtler than that. It is the mechanism by which an organization that has always succeeded processes the early signals of failure as challenges to be solved rather than evidence that the program is in trouble. Lombard reads Hooker's report. He picks up the phone and calls two of his senior engineers. He asks for a revised materials testing schedule. He asks for options on blade geometry changes. He asks for a cost estimate on switching to titanium as a contingency. He does not ask, should we tell Lockheed right now? Because telling Lockheed right now, 8 weeks after the contract signing, with the announcement still fresh in the newspapers, with the shares still elevated and the government still beaming, feels like something Rolls-Royce simply does not do. You fix the problem first. Then you report a solution, not a failure. This is not cynical calculation. It is the company's entire identity operating as a reflex. And so, through the summer and autumn of 1968, the testing continues. The failures continue. A modified blade geometry is tested. It survives longer before fracturing. Progress is logged. Then a new test condition produces a new failure mode. Progress is unlogged. Costs begin to climb. Not dramatically. Not in a way that triggers any single alarm. A little more metal testing here. A few more engineering hours there. Overtime on the weekend for the materials lab. Each additional expense is individually manageable. Collectively, they are adding up to a number that Rolls-Royce's financial team has not yet totaled because nobody has asked them to total it. In Burbank, California, Lockheed's production team is building the airframe for the L-1011. It is proceeding on schedule. The aircraft is designed around the RB211 specifications, the pylon attachment points, the nacelle geometry, the thrust reverser architecture. All of it is built around this engine and only this engine. Lockheed cannot switch suppliers at this stage without scrapping the airframe and starting over. They are dependent on Rolls-Royce, completely. And in Derby, in October 1968, 1 month after the test failure that opened this story, a calculation is sitting in the drawer of Adrian Lombard's desk that would, if it were presented to the full board of Rolls-Royce, almost certainly change everything. The calculation shows that if the carbon fiber blade problem cannot be resolved in the next 8 months, the switch to titanium will add somewhere between £40 million and £65 million to the development cost of the RB211. The contract allows for none of that. Lombard has not yet shown it to the full board. He still believes the blades can work. He is an engineer, and engineers believe in solutions. He is also inside a company that has never in its history told a client, "We may have promised you something we cannot deliver." The autumn of 1968 ends. The test failures continue. And the most dangerous thing happening inside Rolls-Royce right now is not the engine. It is the silence around what the engine cannot yet do, a silence held in place by reputation, by pride, by the absolute collective refusal of 80,000 people's identity to accept what the numbers are beginning to say. The problem is not breaking, it is spreading. Chapter 5. The number that ended everything in minutes. On the 11th of November, 1970, a man named Frederick Corfield, Britain's Minister for Aerospace, is handed a document in his Whitehall office and asked to read it before his 3 o'clock meeting. He reads it once, Then he reads it again. Then he picks up the phone. The document is a private briefing from the Rolls-Royce board. It is not a press release, not a shareholder notice, not anything the public will see for months. It is a number, an internal projection produced by the company's own financial team of the total cost overrun on the RB 211 program. The number is £170 million against an original fixed price contract of £135 million, against a total development budget that was never supposed to exceed £65 million, against a company whose entire balance sheet cannot absorb what this document is describing. Corfield does not go to his 3:00 meeting. The path to this moment runs 2 years through the Derby test bays, through a series of engineering decisions that were each individually reasonable and collectively fatal. After the carbon fiber blade failures of 1968, the Rolls-Royce team made the call to switch to titanium. It was the right engineering decision. It was a decision the fixed-price contract made catastrophic. Titanium blades are heavier. Heavier blades change the engine's center of gravity. Changing the center of gravity requires redesigning the shaft arrangement. Redesigning the shaft arrangement requires recertifying components that had already been approved. Recertification takes time. Time delays production. Production delays trigger the penalty clauses in the Lockheed contract. Penalty clauses cost money. And the money, all of it, every additional pound, comes out of Rolls-Royce's own reserves because the contract is fixed. Sir Denning Pearson, who signed that contract with champagne and headlines in 1968, retires from the chairmanship in 1969. He is replaced by Lord Cole. Cole inherits not a company at the height of its powers. He inherits a crisis that has been managed, contained, and not yet disclosed, a crisis wearing the face of a company still very much in business. Lord Cole makes 2 decisions that matter. The first is to keep going. The logic is still the same logic Pearson used in 1968. The RB 211 design is fundamentally sound. The engineering problems are solvable. Stopping now means writing off everything spent. Completing the program means the engine flies, and a flying RB 211 is worth considerably more than a cancelled one. The second decision is to go back to the government. In the summer of 1970, Rolls-Royce approaches the Heath administration for emergency financial support. The company needs £42 million to keep the RB 211 program alive to delivery. The request is framed carefully. This is not a bailout. It is a bridge loan. It is temporary support for a strategically critical national asset. The government agrees, conditionally, but the agreement does not stop the bleeding. It slows it. The costs continued to climb through the autumn of 1970. Each week, the gap between what the company has and what the program requires widens. The financial team runs updated projections. Each projection is worse than the one before it. In October, the deficit is one number. In November, it is larger. On the factory floor in Derby, Arthur Wilkins notices something he has never noticed in 23 years. Managers are walking faster, not running, not visibly panicked. But there is a change in pace, a change in the way conversations stop when certain people enter a room. Arthur has seen this kind of thing in smaller organizations, a supplier that was going under, a local business in trouble. He has never seen it here. He mentions it to a colleague at lunch. The colleague tells him he is imagining things. But Arthur Wilkins has spent 23 years reading the physical signals of machines that are about to fail. He knows the difference between an engine that is running well and one that is about to tell you something you do not want to hear. He goes back to his section and works his afternoon shift with the specific focus of a man who is trying not to think about what he already knows. On the 4th of February, 1971, at 7:42 in the morning, Rolls-Royce Limited files for insolvency. The announcement is made at 9 o'clock. By 9:15, the news is on the BBC. By 10 o'clock, men are standing outside the Derby factory in the February cold, some of them holding the morning's paper, some of them not quite believing the headline they are reading even though it is printed clearly in front of them. Rolls-Royce. Bankrupt. Frederick Corfield faces Parliament that afternoon. He is measured, controlled, Precise. The language of a minister who has been briefed on what can and cannot be said in public. He confirms that the government will act. He confirms that the company will not simply cease to exist. He confirms that jobs will be protected, that the RB 211 program will continue, that the national strategic interest will be served. What he does not say, what no one in Parliament says that afternoon, is the thing that is actually true, that the greatest engineering company in British history has just been destroyed not by sabotage, not by recession, not by accident, but by the weight of its own reputation, because Rolls-Royce spent 2 years refusing to say 3 words that might have changed everything. We need help. And now it is too late for 3 words to fix anything. In the factory, Arthur Wilkins clocks out at 4:30. He collects his tools from his station, a habit, not an instruction. Nobody has told him to leave. He walks down the corridor past the framed photographs. He walks past the canteen where the newspaper clipping is still on the notice board. The one from March 1968, Sir Denning Pearson shaking hands at the Savoy. He stops and looks at it. He reads the headline. Rolls-Royce secures landmark aviation contract. Then Arthur Wilkins does something he has not done at work in 23 years. He pulls the clipping off the notice board. He folds it once. He puts it in his coat pocket. He walks out of the factory. And somewhere in Whitehall, in a government meeting room that smells of cold coffee and carpet cleaner, a group of ministers are about to make a decision that will determine whether the name above those Derby gates means anything tomorrow, or whether it becomes, like so many great British institutions before it, a monument to what the country used to be capable of. The government is moving. But the question nobody in that room has answered yet is the one that will define the next chapter of this story entirely. Can you save a company whose greatest product was never an engine? It was trust. And trust, unlike titanium, cannot be re-engineered. Chapter 6. The government bought what the market abandoned. On the 23rd of February, 1971, 19 days after Rolls-Royce Limited files for insolvency, a man named John Davies stands at the dispatch box in the House of Commons and tells Parliament something that no Conservative minister has ever said in that chamber. The government is buying it, not rescuing it, not lending it money, buying it. Davies is the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry under Prime Minister Edward Heath. He is a former industrialist, a man who spent years in the private sector before entering politics, a man who believes, has always believed, that markets should decide what survives and what doesn't. He is standing in front of his own party and announcing the nationalization of a private company. The labor benches go quiet. Not because they disagree, because they cannot believe what they are hearing from the other side. Heath's government has no choice, and everyone in that room knows it. Rolls-Royce supplies engines to the Royal Air Force, the Vulcan bomber, the Victor, the Nimrod, the VC-10. If Rolls-Royce ceases to exist, Britain's ability to maintain its own military air fleet collapses overnight. That is not a business consequence. It is a defense emergency. And beyond the military contracts, the RB 211 program, the program that caused the bankruptcy, is still the only engine designed and partially certified to power the Lockheed L-1011 TriStar. Lockheed has already spent hundreds of millions building an aircraft around specifications written for this engine. If Rolls-Royce dies completely, Lockheed faces its own catastrophe. The political pressure from Washington arrives in London within hours of the bankruptcy announcement. So the government moves. The solution is a split. The luxury car division, Rolls-Royce Motors, is separated from the aero engine business and placed into private administration, eventually to be sold separately. The aero engine division becomes Rolls-Royce 1971 Limited, a new company, government-owned, capitalized with public funds, carrying the RB 211 program forward under state control. It is, on paper, a plan. What it is not is a fix. Lord Carrington, Defense Secretary, briefs the cabinet on the full strategic exposure. The numbers in that briefing are not made public for years. The gap between what Rolls-Royce needs to complete the RB 211 and what the original Lockheed contract will ever pay is not a gap that government funds easily close. It is a commitment to pour public money into a program that has already consumed everything the company had and is still not finished. In Derby, the men go back to work. Not all of them. The restructuring that follows nationalization cuts deep. Sections are reorganized. Management layers are removed. Overtime disappears. The generous pension arrangements that made a Rolls-Royce career feel like a lifetime contract are reviewed and revised. Michael Wilkins, Arthur's son, 18 months into his apprenticeship, is told his program will continue, but under new terms, with no guarantees about what comes after qualification. He tells his father that evening. Arthur Wilkins sits at the kitchen table and says nothing for a long time. Then he says, "Finish it anyway. The skill is still yours." Meanwhile, in Burbank, California, Daniel Houghton, chairman of Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, is managing his own crisis. Lockheed has contracts with Eastern Airlines, TWA, and Air Holdings of London for 144 L-1011 TriStar aircraft. Those airlines have paid deposits. Those deposits are based on delivery schedules. Those delivery schedules assume the RB-211 would be certified and in production by now. It is not. The airlines are asking questions that Houghton cannot yet answer. He flies to London in March of 1971. The renegotiation is brutal and necessary in equal measure. The fixed-price contract, the contract that broke Rolls-Royce, is replaced with a cost-plus arrangement. Every pound of additional development cost is now shared, reallocated, absorbed differently. It is the contract that should have been written in 1968. Signing it in 1971 is an admission, formal and final, that the original deal was built on assumptions rather than certainty. Houghton leaves London with a new agreement and a company that is still alive. But here is what the renegotiated contract cannot fix: trust. Pratt & Whitney, watching from Hartford, Connecticut, does not celebrate publicly. They don't need to. The airlines watching the Rolls-Royce collapse are drawing their own conclusions. Pan American, which had been evaluating the L-1011 alongside the DC-10, signs with General Electric. American Airlines stays with Pratt & Whitney. The orders that might have come to the RB-211, the ones that would have made the original contract make financial sense, go somewhere else. Quietly, without a press release, without anyone having to say the words out loud. They understood that the problem was never really about the engine at all. It was about whether you could bet your airline on a company that had just needed a government to keep it breathing. And the answer, for enough of them, is no. Chapter 7. The engine worked, but too late now. In the spring of 1972, Stanley Hooker walks back into the Rolls-Royce Derby facility for the first time since the bankruptcy and finds something he did not expect to find. The engine works. Not almost. Not provisionally. It works. Within specification, within performance targets, within the noise and fuel consumption parameters that Lockheed wrote into the original contract 4 years earlier. The RB-211-22B is producing 42,000 pounds of thrust. The titanium fan blades, the blades that cost the company everything when it switched from carbon fiber, are performing without failure under every test condition the certification program can throw at them. Hooker is 67 years old. He retired once. He came back because the engine was still unfinished, and an unfinished engine is, to a man like Stanley Hooker, an open wound. He writes in his private notes that week, "The engine is everything we said it would be. The pity is the timing. The pity is the timing." 6 words that carry more weight than any financial report, any parliamentary debate, any newspaper headline from the previous 3 years. By mid-1972, the RB-211 development costs have reached £170 million, more than 2.5 times the original projection. The British government has injected £42 million in emergency funds. The renegotiated Lockheed contract has reallocated costs. The program is no longer accelerating toward ruin. It has been stabilized, at enormous public expense, just in time to produce a product that is genuinely excellent. Too late to save the company that designed it. The first Lockheed L-1011 TriStar powered by the RB-211 enters commercial service with Eastern Airlines on the 26th of April, 1972. The aircraft performs well. The engine performs well. Passengers boarding in New York and deplaning in Miami have no idea that the machine pulling them through the sky at 35,000 feet was at the center of the largest industrial bankruptcy in British history. The reviews, if they could be called that, are good. But read the order numbers. When the L-1011 program opened, airline analysts projected demand for 400 to 500 aircraft. At that volume, the RB-211 program makes financial sense. The development cost is absorbed across hundreds of engines. The per-unit economics recover. The contract becomes profitable. By 1972, confirmed orders stand at 178, not 400, not 500. The gap between projection and reality is exactly the size of the trust problem that the bankruptcy created in the airline industry. The DC-10, powered by General Electric and Pratt & Whitney engines, is capturing the orders that the L-1011 was supposed to win. The competitor did not build a better aircraft. They simply remained standing when Rolls-Royce fell. The human accounting runs parallel to the financial one, quieter and more permanent. By 1973, the Rolls-Royce workforce at Derby has contracted from its peak of over 83,000 across all sites to significantly fewer. The exact redundancy figures are managed carefully in public communications, phased, structured, described with the language of reorganization rather than collapse. But on Nightingale Road in Derby, on Leopold Street, in the pub on the corner where Rolls-Royce men have met on Friday evenings for 40 years, the language is simpler. People are gone. Arthur Wilkins takes early retirement in 1973. He is 49 years old. He was supposed to have 15 more working years. His son Michael qualifies as a machinist and finds work, not at Rolls-Royce, which has stopped taking on the intake volumes it once considered standard, but at a supplier company 2 miles from the Derby plant. It is decent work. It is not the same thing. The collapse timeline, viewed end to end, produces a number that is worth sitting with directly. From the signing of the Lockheed contract in March 1968 to the bankruptcy filing in February 1971 is 35 months. In 35 months, a company that had spent 60 years building the most trusted name in aerospace engineering consumed itself. The proximate cause was a fixed-price contract on an unproven technology. The actual cause was the systematic inability of a great institution to say, at the moment, that still mattered. We overcommitted. We need to renegotiate. 35 months. The RB-211 is eventually certified. The engine flies. It goes on to be developed into the Trent family, one of the most successful commercial jet engine lines in history. The technology that bankrupted Rolls-Royce Limited becomes the foundation of Rolls-Royce plc's commercial success decades later. But Stanley Hooker, sitting in Derby in the spring of 1972 looking at an engine that finally works, is not thinking about the decades ahead. He is thinking about the 35 months behind. And the question he writes in his notes that week, the question he never fully answers, is the one that nobody in the boardroom of 1968 thought to ask before Sir Denning Pearson picked up the pen. What is the cost of being right too late? Chapter 8. Passengers landed safe, not knowing what fell. On the morning of the 26th of April, 1972, a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar lifts off from John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York, carrying 256 passengers and the engine that destroyed Britain's most trusted company. The flight is smooth. The RB-211 performs without a single recorded anomaly. Eastern Airlines Flight 49 touches down in Miami 2 hours and 11 minutes later. The passengers collect their luggage. They go about their days. None of them know that the engine hanging beneath the wing of that aircraft cost the British government £42 million in emergency funds, ended 80,000 careers across one of the country's most storied industrial employers, and forced a conservative government to nationalize a private company in order to prevent a defense emergency. They know nothing. They just got off a plane. That is the final, complete irony of the Rolls-Royce story. The product worked. The engine that caused the bankruptcy. The engine that shattered the careers of Arthur Wilkins and his son Michael and tens of thousands of men like them. Two. The engine that forced Frederick Corfield to face Parliament with numbers no one in that building wanted to hear. The engine that put receivers into the Derby factory in February 1971. That engine ultimately did what it was designed to do. It flew. Sir Denning Pearson, who signed the contract in 1968 and retired in 1969, lives to see it. He does not give many interviews in his later years. When he does speak about the RB211, he speaks about it as an engineer, about the technical achievement, about the innovation of the three-shaft design, about the materials science that had to be re-engineered under pressure. He does not speak often about the fixed price clause, or about what he knew and didn't know in the spring of 1968 when the pen was in his hand. He is not a villain. That is important to say directly, and to mean it. Pearson made a decision that was reasonable given the information he had, the competitive pressure he faced, and the institutional identity he was carrying. He believed in the engine. He believed in his engineers. He believed in the company's ability to deliver, because the company had always delivered. The belief was not arrogance. It was evidence-based, until the evidence stopped supporting it, and by then the contract was signed and the clock was running. Lord Cole, who replaced Pearson and carried the crisis through to bankruptcy, makes no public statement at the time of the first commercial flight. He is managing the newly nationalized Rolls-Royce 1971 Limited, dealing with the practical engineering and financial realities of keeping the company operational. There is no time for reflection. There is only the next problem. The red brick factory on Nightingale Road in Derby still stands in 1972. The name above the gates is the same name it has always been. But walk through those gates in 1972 and the atmosphere is different in a way that cannot be precisely measured but is immediately felt. The men who remain are skilled and committed. The work is real. The engines coming off the line are excellent. But the feeling that once filled this place, the feeling that this company and this city and this nation's identity were somehow fused together, the metal and the tolerances and the quiet pride of a line worker who could tell when a shaft was wrong before the instruments confirmed it, that feeling is gone, not damaged, gone. The canteen notice board that once held the clipping of Sir Denning Pearson shaking hands at the Savoy has a new notice on it. Shift schedules. A reminder about car park allocation, the kind of administrative paper that covers the walls of any large workplace. Nobody posts newspaper clippings anymore. There is one last image from this chapter of the story that belongs here. In the summer of 1972, a journalist from the Derby Evening Telegraph walks through the factory on an access visit arranged by the new Rolls-Royce communications team. He speaks to several workers on the floor. He is looking for a quote about recovery, about resilience, about the future. He finds an older machinist, not Arthur Wilkins, who has already taken his early retirement, but a man of similar age, similar tenure, similar history. The journalist asks him how it feels to work here now after everything that happened. The man looks at the engine on the stand beside him for a moment. Then he says, "The work is the same. The work was always good. It's just that it used to mean something bigger than the work." The journalist uses the quote. It runs on page 7. And somewhere in Whitehall, the civil servants managing the nationalized company's finances are already preparing the projections for the next 5 years. Projections that will show a company that is viable, that is competitive, that is producing world-class engines. What the projections cannot show is the thing the machinist described. What used to be bigger than the work. And whether something like that, once it leaves a place, ever truly comes back. Chapter 9. The name survived. The feeling did not 53 years after the bankruptcy filing. Rolls-Royce plc is a global aerospace company listed on the London Stock Exchange with a market capitalization in the billions of pounds. The name is everywhere. Its Trent engines power the Airbus A380 and the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, two of the most advanced commercial aircraft ever built. Its defense division supplies turbines to military forces across the world. Its Civil Nuclear and Power Systems division works across energy infrastructure in multiple countries. By any standard measure of corporate survival, Rolls-Royce did not just recover, it grew. And yet, walk into the Derby factory today, now a designated heritage site alongside the functioning manufacturing facility, and the first thing you see is a museum. Glass cases, framed photographs, a preserved Merlin engine behind a rope barrier, the Eagle, the Avon, the Conway. The same engines Adrian Lombard walked past in the corridor on the night he turned off the test chamber light in September 1968. They are exhibits now. The RB211, the engine that triggered the bankruptcy, the engine Stanley Hooker stayed out of retirement to finish, the engine that flew for the first time in commercial service on that Eastern Airlines flight out of JFK in April 1972, has its own display case. A placard describes it as a turning point in commercial aviation technology. It does not mention the bankruptcy, not directly. The visitors who come through on weekday mornings, school groups, aviation enthusiasts, retired engineers bringing their grandchildren, stand in front of that engine and take photographs. They read the placard. Some of them ask the guides about the history. The guides give good answers. The carbon fiber blades, the titanium switch, the Lockheed contract. The guides know the facts. What the guides cannot show you is the human architecture that surrounded those facts. The Arthur Wilkinses, the Michael Wilkinses, the 11 households on Nightingale Road, the grammar school careers officer telling his best students that Rolls-Royce was a path rather than a job. That architecture is not in the display case. It is in the city. Derby today is a city of 260,000 people. It has a university, a football club, a redeveloped waterfront, industries that have grown in the decades since the aerospace dominance of the 1960s. Rolls-Royce is still by far the city's largest private sector employer. The connection between the company and the community is still real, still structural, still important. But it is not generational anymore. Young engineers who join Rolls-Royce today do not join because their grandfathers worked there. They apply because the salary is good, the technology is interesting, and the company has a strong graduate program. Those are legitimate reasons. They are good reasons. They are also completely different reasons from the ones that filled Arthur Wilkins' boots every Tuesday morning in January 1965. That shift is not Rolls-Royce's fault. It is not anyone's fault. It is the distance that time and events place between an institution and the community it once defined. But it is real. The attempted revivals of the brand's meaning have come in several forms over the decades. The separation of Rolls-Royce Motors, eventually sold to Vickers, then to BMW, created a luxury car brand that trades heavily on the name's historical weight. Rolls-Royce Phantom cars sell in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to buyers in Shanghai and Dubai and Los Angeles, who associate the name with prestige, with craft, with something that feels irreducibly British and irreducibly excellent. They are buying the echo of something. The aero engine business, meanwhile, has rebuilt its technical reputation fully. The Trent engine is not just a descendant of the RB211. It is, in engineering terms, one of the best commercial turbofan engines ever produced. The three-shaft architecture that Lombard and Hooker refused to abandon even in the worst of the crisis years is now the design foundation of everything Rolls-Royce builds. The engineering bet, the technical vision, was right all along. Sir Denning Pearson was right about the engine. He was wrong about the contract. And in the world of industrial finance, being right about the product does not protect you from being wrong about the structure of the deal that funds it. That lesson is carved into the financial history of British manufacturing as permanently as the company name is carved into the stone above the Derby factory gates. The name survived. The feeling did not. And if you ask the retired engineers who spent their careers inside that building, the ones still alive, the ones who will still talk about it. They will tell you about the work first, the tolerances, the tests, the engines they built and certified and handed over knowing they were excellent. They are proud of the work. Then, if you wait long enough, if the conversation finds its way to the winter of 1971 and the receivers at the gate, and the morning the news came through on the BBC, something changes in the way they speak. It is not bitterness. It is closer to the feeling of standing outside a house you used to live in. The house is still there. Someone else lives there now. The walls are the same. The door is the same. But it is not your house anymore. And you cannot explain why that matters so much, except that it does. You can still see the name above the gate. You just cannot feel what it used to mean. Chapter 10. 3 lessons paid for with real lives. 3 lessons come out of the collapse of Rolls-Royce Limited. Not opinions, not business school theory. Lessons carved by actual events, paid for in actual money, measured in actual careers lost and communities changed, and institutions that never quite recovered the ground they gave up. They are worth naming directly. The first is this. When a company's reputation becomes more important than its honesty, the reputation is already starting to die. Adrian Lombard knew in September of 1968 that the RB 211 had a fundamental materials problem. The data was in his drawer. The failure count was in his test report. The gap between what the engine could do and what the contract required it to do was measurable in specific numbers. He did not take that data to the full board in September 1968. He did not present it to Sir Denning-Pearson in terms that would force an immediate decision. He went back to work. He did this not because he was dishonest. He did it because he was inside a company whose entire identity was built on delivering certainty. Delivering doubt, walking into a boardroom and saying the engine is not ready. And the contract we signed may not be survivable, felt like an act of disloyalty to everything the company stood for. That feeling killed the company more completely than any fan blade failure ever could. When doubt cannot enter a room, the truth cannot either. And a company that cannot hear the truth about its own situation cannot make the decisions that would change it. This is not unique to Rolls-Royce. It is the pattern. It is the reason that organizations with the longest records of success are often the most vulnerable to this exact failure mode. The stronger the track record, the more impossible it becomes to say, this time, we may be wrong. The second lesson is this: selling the future before it exists does not just create financial risk. It creates a trap. The fixed-price contract Sir Denning-Pearson signed in March 1968 was not reckless in isolation. Fixed-price contracts are normal instruments of commercial aviation. What made this one fatal was the combination of 3 factors occurring simultaneously: an unproven technology at the core of the engine, a development timeline with no buffer, and a company culture that would not escalate problems until they were too large to hide. Any one of those 3 factors, managed differently, might have changed the outcome. A cost-plus contract would have let the development cost overrun be absorbed without destroying Rolls-Royce's balance sheet. A longer delivery timeline would have given the materials science the space it needed. A culture that rewarded early problem escalation rather than punishing it would have surfaced the blade failure data in time to renegotiate. None of those things happened. Because the contract was signed, the timeline was set, the price was fixed, and the company's identity required it to deliver on all 3. When you sell the future before it exists, you create a structure in which every problem that emerges after the sale must be solved in secret, because acknowledging the problem publicly means acknowledging that what you sold was not real. The secrecy compounds the problem. The compounded problem becomes the crisis. The crisis becomes the bankruptcy. The third lesson is the one that matters most and travels furthest. Trust does not recover at the same speed it falls. The RB 211 was certified in 1972. It flew. It performed. It went on to become one of the most successful commercial engine platforms in aviation history. The product that caused the bankruptcy became, in time, the foundation of a multi-billion-pound aerospace business. And yet, The L1011 TriStar only ever sold 250 units before Lockheed ended the program in 1983. The wide-body market that Rolls-Royce and Lockheed together were supposed to own was taken by Boeing and McDonnell Douglas and the engine manufacturers who powered their aircraft. Not because the L1011 was inferior, because the confidence of the airline industry and the supply chain behind it was gone. Trust, once broken at the scale that the Rolls-Royce bankruptcy broke it, does not return when the product improves. It returns, if it returns at all, over a decade or more of consistent, uninterrupted delivery, a decade in which the company must earn back, one contract at a time, the automatic confidence that it spent 60 years building and 35 months destroying. Some of that trust came back. The Trent program, the modern Rolls-Royce, the billions in defense and civil contracts. All of that is evidence that trust can be rebuilt. But rebuilt is not the same as restored. And here is the final image from this story. On Nightingale Road in Derby, the terraced house where Arthur Wilkins tied his bootlaces every morning is still standing. The street looks much as it did. The houses are there. The road runs the same direction. Arthur Wilkins retired in 1973 at 49 years old. His son Michael worked as a machinist at the supplier company for 11 years before the company restructured and his section was moved overseas. Michael requalified as a heating engineer. He runs a small business today. He does not work in aerospace. The Derby factory still stands. The Rolls-Royce name is still on it. Engines are still made inside it. The work is still excellent. But there is no Arthur Wilkins walking through those gates this morning, no man carrying 30 years of inherited knowledge in his hands, no grandfather's memory of riveting airframes in 1918, no son asking about apprenticeships in the front room on Nightingale Road. That chain is broken. Not because the work stopped, because of 35 months in which a great company confused its reputation for permanence, its confidence for certainty, and its history of success for a guarantee of survival. They built machines that were designed to never fail, and forgot the one system that always does: belief. If this story made you think about the companies we trust, the institutions we count on, the careers built on names we assume will last forever, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every story on this channel exists to make you think differently about the world you work in. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and never miss a story that challenges what you think you know. Drop a comment below. Which lesson from this story hits closest to home for you, and why? Your thoughts might be exactly what someone else in this community needs to read today.